everybody. Welcome back to Unlimited Commander. I'm Adam, and I'm joined as always by my lovely co-host Matt. Matt, how's it going?
It's going okay. It is week 2 of growing a beard until I have fried chicken in Washington D.C. My lips are dry and my throat is hoarse, and water does nothing. It can only be cured by hot chicken grease and fried skin.
I support this in both ways. If you never have fried chicken, then you grow a beard, and I don't know if you know how I feel about beards, but
now that it's in at this length, you can really see what I was talking about before, though. Like, there's a very fine little patch right here, and right here, and right here. I just don't grow hair. Like, my body just decides not to grow hair. But
just grow it longer, and then it hides those patches.
Yeah, I mean, if it goes long enough, it'll be fine. I will say though that because I've been craving fried chicken, I've been doing a lot more baked chicken at home, and baked chicken is fine. There's nothing. It's not fried chicken, but it's fine. But one of the struggles I'm having with it is that every time you cook a piece of chicken, no matter how good you are at like timing out when it's supposed to be done, it is always a crapshoot as to whether or not the very, very middle of it is still very pink or not. And I can't hit it. I don't have a meat thermometer.
Oh, there it is. That's what I was going to say. That is the ticket. That is the ticket with any sort of meat. We are not a meat podcast, but we're going to deviate for a sec. If you want the best doneness on your meats, you get a meat thermometer and you do it off of that. There's no such thing on any of the, I watch a lot of cooking YouTube and cooking reality TV. I like cooking. It's a big thing here.
Me too.
And the meat thermometer is the way to go. Your doneness is how well done it is in the middle, not how long it was in the oven.
Yeah, it's true. And I have, I've dried out pieces of chicken with them only being in the oven for a half an hour, and I've had completely underdone insides with them being in there for 50 minutes. Every chicken is different. The only thing you can do is use a meat thermometer. But I don't want to just buy a cheapo meat thermometer. I want to get one of those nice ones where you can put it in and you have it connected to your phone or whatever.
I also want one of these really bad, but you can't hold out until, because those things are friggin' expensive.
It's true.
I've been looking into one of the wireless leave-in ones, and even then they have a super short range. You put a little receiver just outside the oven because you can't pull it away, and the Bluetooth ones go they don't work for nothing because of how short the range is, because you're inside of a metal box. And radio waves are completely stumped by metal things. So it's really hard to get them to connect from inside the oven. I've seen these, but just for now, hit up don't go to the dollar store, but go to Walmart or Target and get yourself just a $5 or $10 one, and it'll improve your life greatly. And then what you're doing is you're setting yourself up, because you're going to learn to use the crappy one. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to upgrade and you're going to feel better.
I mean, that's probably true. In reality, that's true. And if I get one, I can fry my own chicken.
You can fry your own chicken.
Because right now I cannot. So
no.
Okay. Well, we'll I'll update y'all in the next couple episodes to see if I've managed to actually go ahead and do that. What about you, Adam? What's going on?
Nothing to do with meat thermometers. Although I have been grilling a lot. It's been really nice, and I've been enjoying having my barbecue set up. But no, huge big news in the world of cubing. We have a fresh new cube that we played this weekend. You were there. I'm personally very excited about it, mainly because it was a very fun experience to play a cube, a commander cube that wasn't mine.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a really fun experience. Light, the Phyrexian, finally finished up. their list and got a few of us together this weekend, and we drafted it and we played it, and it went really good, and they're doing a really good job with it. I'm very excited for it. And generally speaking, just enjoying having more cubes out there to play. I'm very pro cube, as you may or may not have noticed. And
yeah, I've heard that from you. Yeah, no, that the cube experience was very fun this past weekend. I actually felt a little bad because during that session, I had another engagement that I had to do, like I had been conscripted into. So I was kind of half focusing on draft, and these people were giving me so much grief. They're like, just like, Matt, it looks like you're 2 packs behind. If you want to hurry it up there, brother. And I'm just like, oh, I'm sorry. And I'll just click through. My deck ended up dope. My deck was sick as hell. For a little context, Light has set up that cube so that you can draft either 2-color or 3-color. If you are drafting in 3 colors, you have to hit certain goals or challenges. And by doing so, you unlock a 3-color commander that you can use. And the more you hit that goal, the more support you get. So you can get like an Abzan charm, or get the ability to use a 2-color commander and give it a 3rd color by giving it double pips of whatever it's missing, or whatever. So it was a very cool experience. It was built very neatly, very succinctly. I played Azuri Sphere guy from
Stalker of Spheres.
Azuri Sphere guy. Everybody knows that card.
Yeah, that guy, Sphere guy.
But yeah, like when it comes out, you can pay 3 and proliferate, and then or proliferate twice, and then every time you proliferate, draw a card. I only had to do that one time to keep every single battle on the board from going off, which was awesome for me. Not so good for the people playing the battles, but being able to push up battles that aren't yours is actually a really good counter to battles, y'all, in case you didn't know.
Yep.
And other than that, though, I got to play some really cool cards. I don't usually go Simic when I'm in sealed pools or draft pools. I feel like Simic often ends up being a little more shallow than you expect it to be, considering how many powerful cards there are in Simic. Just because there's so many of them that require you to have bigger pieces around it. But I did not feel shaken at all on table. And Adam's deck was rocking the house so hard that I had to swing at him for 24 damage to keep him from killing me.
Yeah, I was actually shooting for. I did try I succeeded at, I should say, one of the challenges, and I ended up with the Beamtown Bullies unlocked. I went for Jund deck, which the deck itself actually ran really well. And I mostly just shot for cards that I haven't seen before or played with before. And it turned out pretty good. Breach the Multiverse turns out it's pretty good.
Yeah.
Breach the Multiverse pretty good.
Breach the Multiverse, especially when you hit my my 12/12 Trampler or whatever it was that was in my deck.
Yeah.
You managed to pull out. That was so good.
Mondrak didn't hurt none either.
Mondrak was doing some good stuff too.
Yep. So, but very excited. All in all, I think that I feel good that we've managed to at least touch one life with our efforts and in preaching about how we like Cube and some of the benefits of Cube. And it's already started to reach out to some of our friend group aside from just like my own Cube. Now there's more than one. We can try different things. And I'm just generally looking forward. And with any hope, so many more cubes will be available to us that we can try. And I think that I am particularly excited to see some of the different ideas that are like that were come up with to expand on what it is that the cube does. Like, there's generally an understanding of how draft works with Magic, but with certain things like these challenges and like creating an extra level of gameplay, I felt was a really good way of adding another layer to something that we're already fairly familiar with.
Mm-hmm. I thought so too.
So what are we doing today?
Well, I figured that we would do something kind of fun today. So we had an original idea brought to us, I believe, by Light.
Yeah, absolutely.
while over the course of the last couple weeks, where we were talking about planeswalkers and their introductions into cubes, essentially. Mm-hmm. Whether or not we think that they're good for them, whether or not we like them. And then shortly after that, I found out that Aftermath had been spoiled. And one of the big things that we learn about Aftermath is that a lot of the planeswalkers are being desparked. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And they are becoming legendary creatures. It looks like WotC is going to highly ebb on the number of planeswalkers that are going to be coming out. Sounds like planeswalkers are going to be a sometimes food again, which is an interesting way to go. I have thoughts on it both ways. But I figured since that happened along with this question that we would do a planeswalkers in retrospect kind of thing. So my goal is to give a little bit of history about planeswalkers for people who don't know, but I want to talk about their usefulness in all the formats that we enjoy and ultimately kind of come to some kind of idea of how we feel about planeswalkers in general and how we feel about them not being a thing as often as they have been.
Yeah. So to give a brief history, and I don't think that our plan is to like go into every like facet of what a planeswalker is and how it's affected everything, but just generally speaking, like planeswalkers have been around for about 15 years. We decided 1 or 2 episodes ago. I can't remember which.
2007.
Yeah. So they came out in Lorwyn, but that was not where they were intended to come out. They were actually intended to come out in a set called Planar Chaos, which was the 3rd set in the Time Spiral block. Those who are more recent may remember last year's Time Spiral remastered set that took a lot of the cards that were out then and brought them back into like current times memory. But that's where Planeswalkers were supposed to go. Because that set was about like breaking new ground for Magic back then. And Time Spiral was like looking backwards. Then the middle one was Future Sight, which was about looking forwards. And that's where we first heard about Planeswalkers. A lot like how we just heard about battles and how they were like written in some reminder text on Atraxa Grand Unifier. And back in the day, there was a card called Tarmogoyf, which had its time in the sun. And there's lots of videos about it. You should actually go watch. Ristic Studies did a really good one, actually. But on that card, it says that it gets +1/+1 for each card type in your graveyard. And then it listed them out. And on there was this weird word called Planeswalker. And everybody was like, what is this about? I don't know what this card is. And so they spoiled it. And then it was supposed to be in Planar Chaos, but they ran out of time and space in development to do so. So they just like held it off one set and they released them in Lorwyn. Mm-hmm. And we got the original 5, 1 for each color. Characters we've come to know and love over the course of time. We ended up with, in order, who's the white one? A Johnny.
Mm-hmm.
And then we ended up with Jace, Liliana, Chandra, and Garruk.
That's right.
Those were the original 5, and they all came out in Lorwyn. Mm-hmm. And everything since then, as they say, is basically history.
Yeah. Interesting note on the Planeswalkers being a type in that set. A lot of new players were very confused. What's a Planeswalker? We don't know. Older players were absolutely jumping over themselves because originally the lore of Magic stated that you as a player are a planeswalker going from plane to plane and summoning your creatures to help you in a battle with other planeswalkers. So they were blown away by the idea that this would become a card type, which of course it did. I want to quickly kind of go over what planeswalkers do in a deck. Now, there's obviously different types of decks that do different things, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go through that with you. The main thing that planeswalkers do for a player using them is, 1, take focus off of them by giving another target to take damage, to receive combat, to take spells, and to highlight things that you already want to be doing in your deck in a bigger scope. Planeswalkers being the way that they work, you get to use each one of their abilities once per turn during your turn, sorcery speed, blah, blah, blah. I know that I'm going through that quickly, but otherwise we'll be on rules for 40 minutes. The usefulness of a planeswalker, though, often comes from the fact that since it has its own life source, it has its own counter on how it lives, your opponent has to choose every turn. Are they willing to give you another boost from this planeswalker on the following turn by leaving it alive? Or do they kill it at the risk of not doing damage to you, the player, which is how you ultimately win the game? So unlike creatures whose main issue of creatures is to do damage to a player to kill them, or sorceries or instants to give you some type of advantage in order to get to that point, planeswalkers were much more of a reactionary situation for the defender.
See our episode about battles, about why like giving your opponent or giving like upping your own life total in this way is important, because we discussed about how battles create the similar situation but for your opponent, where like they were given a life total increase by putting a battle out. That's very similar to how planeswalkers work for yourself. So I will add just like a little more context that I don't think that we had put on here now that we've talked about what they do and where they came from, is that why it's important now that we're discussing them is this card type has been like a really hot button topic for a while, because lore wise over the last several years, the whole story has kind of shifted around these characters in the story. And so there's lots of titles for them, like a deck that has many of them we call Super Friends decks, referring to like the DC universes, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, etc., because they're kind of the superheroes. And if you were paying attention to the story over at least the last year, but like more so than this, we've kind of had this build up with culminating in March of the Machine, where it felt very much like the Marvel Cinematic Universe of late, where all of these characters have been like building up with little things and all these different movies that have all culminated into one big team up event. And that's basically what March of the Machine was. And it has kind of warped the game around them a bit. Like a few years ago, there was a set called War of the Spark, which was very specifically about planeswalkers. And in that set, I'm not going to look it up. It doesn't really matter. We're just going to say that that set was like 30% planeswalkers. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Whereas if we look back, we talked about the first set they showed up in. There were 5 in that set.
And there was been over 40 in War of the Spark.
There you go. See? So like the way that the game has taken this card type, which we've discussed, has all sorts of weird nuances to it, from changing the decision paths in a game to altering life totals in a way that don't actually affect the player life total, and all these different things. And the game has just come very much about them, and it just kind of like changed the way the game played. So now it sounds like they're going to start reducing how many we see, and we're going to see, I think, a different kind of magic coming up in the near future.
Now, I think personally, not to spoil the end of this episode, because I'm not, but to add on to what is going to be a final point, a lot of players are having very mixed feelings about this. Players who started after Planeswalkers were already a thing, they don't know any difference in terms of the way that Magic is and has been. They do know about the ramp up and down of Planeswalkers, because obviously at first they only started with like 5 in that first set. There would sometimes be years where there were only like 5 Planeswalkers throughout the course of a year, like 3 in one set, 2 in another set, none in another set. And it wasn't until the last half decade to a decade where you really started seeing a ramp up of like 3 to 5 planeswalkers in every set, sometimes 6 planeswalkers, sometimes 10. Then we had War of the Spark. And since War of the Spark, planeswalkers have been more prevalent across the board. They've tried a lot of different things to balance planeswalkers when they do this kind of stuff, when they added more in. But the whole point originally was going to be like, there's not that many of them anyway, so if they're bombs, whatever. And then when things ramped up, people didn't like it. Older players who played before Planeswalkers sometimes have very strong opinions on whether or not Planeswalkers should even exist. They don't like the extra card type. They didn't like the added complexity that it did to the game. And sometimes they were just mad because they got knocked out by a Planeswalker deck in a weird way. Sometimes Salt just hits that wound.
Yep.
Salt's a hell of a thing.
Salt's a hell of a thing. It's my favorite thing.
But I personally did play Magic prior to Planeswalkers, and then I got back into Magic as Planeswalkers kind of started getting big. So I am a player who has played several Super Friends decks throughout the years in both Constructed and in Commander. And I'm a little more on the fence on how I feel about it, because on one hand, they're strong cards, and sometimes I don't want to play strong Magic all the time. But there is something to be said about the nuance that they add to a game.
Mm-hmm. But, yeah, and I think we'll just start getting into the different formats, because as we like to do, breaking stuff down, either a card or a thing, into all the different things that we appreciate. So, I mean, the first two are probably going to go pretty quick, I think. Why don't you lead us off? How do Planeswalkers, what do you do with Planeswalkers in, say, Sealed and Draft?
Sure. As the premier Sealed player of this podcast.
That sure ain't me.
Use them? Use them. So one of the things that I mentioned about Planeswalkers just a minute ago is that they tend to be fairly powerful cards. It's because they are trying to create a situation in which your opponent wants to get rid of them instead of you. So they tend to be pretty cost efficient for whatever it is they do. Overall, they end up having very versatile options on them, the several options you can do. Sometimes range anywhere from discarding a card to sacking a creature to completely blowing up half of your opponent's board to getting a bunch of +1/+1 counters and trample, killing something on the board, and being able to search your sideboard for a card and put in your hand. They do a lot of stuff. And so because of that, if you have anywhere near enough support in whatever color you get when you're drafting or when you're sealed and you have a Planeswalker, use it, because it is going to add that complexity to your opponent's thought process. And even throwing them off a little bit on that is going to give you some kind of advantage during the game.
Yeah, I would see that. Anything that says you gain 5 life is usually pretty good in Sealed. And I would say Draft is probably the same. Maybe not as hard as just do it. But usually if you see a Planeswalker in your your pack one, pick one, you won't see it on pick 3 usually, right? Once they get scooped up, they're powerful enough, even though the worst ones in something like a draft environment, it doesn't make it very many picks around.
Yeah.
If you don't pack one, pick one, or if you don't crack it and pick one out of a pack, somebody's going to get it before it gets back to you. They're powerful.
It's true. And if you think about that in terms of the way Magic is normally, it's if there's a bomb rare, you usually take the bomb rare. Planeswalkers are usually a bomb rare. That's it just follows that simple line of logic. So you're probably going to pick it. So just pick it and use it, probably, because it's probably going to help you out. Yeah. And whatever it does is certainly going to be beneficial to you in the long run, right?
No. Except for OG Tybalt.
Yes. Oh, good old OG Tybalt. We can do a whole episode on that. I have stories about Planeswalkers that are wild. Speaking of OG Tybalt, and kind of where I want to talk about in Constructed. So when I'm saying Constructed here, I'm talking about 60 card formats, Standard, Explorer, blah, 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 blah. Okay. First thing to say, I am a Super Friends player. I am not talking about a Super Friends deck here. I'm just talking about the general use of Planeswalkers. Generally, I find that Planeswalkers are used to accent what you've already done. I'm about to sneeze. Nope, it's gone.
I'm going to debate real hard during editing on whether or not I cut that whole moment.
Yep, I'll be glad to see it in there. Anyway, so for instance, let's say you're running decking as your main source of winning. Perhaps you are running something like Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, which will aid a self-mill win game. Or maybe you are running one of the 50 other Jaces that mill cards. Ashiok, Dreamrender from War of the Spark, is a great card because you get to mill your opponent's stuff and exile their graveyard so that they can't use that stuff later. Would you want your entire deck to be Planeswalkers if your goal is to mill your opponent? Probably not. Because one, you need to protect your life points from people. And two, there are other kinds of cards that benefit you in those kind of situations. Good draw cards, decent creatures to block with. And, any other things that blue can do. Counter spells. So, but you will often see in top tier lists, there will be like maybe 3 of a particular Planeswalker from that format that is aiding the cause of whatever it is they're doing, just to give them that little bit of oomph.
So, I get where you're coming from. You're taking a very holistic approach to this, and I can appreciate that because my experience in Constructed with standards has not been that way. Like, I can see how, like, in a proper, fair, healthy, balanced format, that's the case. But to add some context to my malcontent, I will say.
Please do.
My first standard back after getting back in as playing as a kid was Scars of Mirrodin standard. Like Zendikar Scars of Mirrodin. So Cobblade is a name that us old folk often sing in war stories. It was very, very heavily revolved around Jace the Mind Sculptor.
Mm-hmm.
And notably being the first ban in like the 10 years prior to that, where they had banned stuff from the Affinity deck from the original Mirrodin. Shocking. And Jace the Mind Sculptor was the only card to play. Mm-hmm. No deck. Like the top 8s were all Jace the Mind Sculptor mirror matches at the time. And if you were playing anything that didn't have Jace in it, you didn't win.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I only know when they wreck formats. Like they're either like all in there, or they just aren't there very much at all. Because like the other one that I think of all the time now is like War of the Spark standard, which of course had many Planeswalkers. And I know that this is like maybe like I can't think of the analogy I'm trying to say, but just I recognize this isn't maybe the best example of my malcontent. But...
Well, War of the Spark is a literal mountain made out of a molehill, right? Or in this case, a mountain made out of a lot of Planeswalkers, like a ton of Planeswalkers.
Yeah. But like the ones that were in there that like they warped formats too, that they lasted in there for years. And not every Planeswalker is like an absolute bomb, but Nissa, who shakes the world, just ruled that standard. And then it was very closely like Liliana Dreadhorde General was the other one that just like, if you weren't playing these cards, you weren't winning.
Wasn't too far after that 3 cost to Fury and 5 cost to Fury showed up, and those both made a blue-white control deck that was absolutely obnoxious to fight against every single time. Made even worse by what's that card called? The Shark Tornado.
Oh yeah, Shark Typhoon.
Shark Typhoon, thank you.
And then like I wasn't super playing standard, but Arena was new and hot, and it was like top of the pandemic. So I also very clearly remember when Oko was still ready and willing to go into battle. So like I don't know of like it's in a perfect world. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. Like they do really good.
Yeah. So I don't actually disagree with you. There are many standard formats where a particular Planeswalker, usually one particular Planeswalker, just blows out everything to the point where it completely warps the format it is. And I don't think that is necessarily contrary to what I'm talking about, but more so as a footnote in what we were trying to accent earlier, which is the power of a Planeswalker, right? Because a Planeswalker is so difficult to balance, what is that sweet spot that makes it threatening enough for the player to take their eyes off the opponent for a minute versus game warping that, like, I could do an entire podcast series where we look at planeswalkers one at a time and figure out ways to better balance them now, knowing what we know about game design and theory that they just didn't have 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever, depending on what's going on. And it's not that that's still not new. Like, we will still see that in the future. There will still be planeswalkers that will end up upsetting the apple cart because people like flashy rares for themselves. They don't necessarily like them for their opponents, but they like them for themselves. And that will always create these moments where something ends up warping. But it's not wrong. It's very important to remember that, like, Jace the Mind Sculptor was an absolute menace in his format. Liliana the Veil was my favorite card during that standard and put in a lot of work across the board. It was not as warping as Jace, but still pretty heavily played throughout the course of things, especially with the number of /X decks.
Like, at least those two weren't in standard together.
Yes, they luckily just missed each other, I believe.
Yeah. Because one was in rotation. Like Rise of Eldrazi, and then Scars was in the middle, and then Innistrad was right after. So at least they weren't together.
Yeah.
Might have been the perfect foil against the other one, though, I guess.
Honestly, it might have helped a little bit, because it sure sucks worse to get rid of your entire deck only to have half of your permanents blown away or whatever, like, it can be wild. But the idea of using them in constructed generally, and this is true too, as part of what we were just talking about, in general, if a planeswalker isn't really, really choice, isn't really, really good, it's not going to see play in the constructed format of that time period, which makes sense because constructed formats are typically where you go to play competitive Magic. I'm using heavy air quotes for those not watching. So,
at least in what we see, I guess much in, and like our follow up to this is going to be Commander, but like, I would say that, like, when we're talking about these formats, the caveat here being that we're talking about recorded competitive these formats, right? Like, you can all a format is restricting the card pool from which you can access to build your deck. So to stay standard, up until actually like this week, apparently, this was the last 2 years tops of sets released. And that's all you could build your deck out of. Pioneer, I actually don't know the start of Pioneer. When's Pioneer start?
Pioneer starts from RTR.
Okay, so Return to Ravnica blocks forward. Anything in there you could build a deck. That's called Pioneer. And then Modern is everything in the Modern frame. So like 8th edition, Mirrored, and Forward. And then there's like Legacy and Vintage, which you don't speak so much about. But they all still followed that same like 60 card minimum deck construction. 4 of each each card maximum, unless the card says otherwise. Relentless Rats, Persistent Petitioners, etc. And so that's all it's really doing, saying like what you can pull out of to build your deck. But when we're speaking about it, we're really just thinking about the ones that are on like the competitive scene. You can play standard at home on your kitchen table and play with whatever you want in those sets. It just says what sets you can pull out of. But I mean, you could still find, and like I used to build janky builds in standard and like when Modern was new, I used to build janky stuff into there too. But like I could get like a couple wins in Friday Night Magic, but I wasn't going to top 8 in that evening. And that's basically what we're coming down to. Like, we're not saying don't play these things, but if you're going into the competitive scene, if you're going to go to a Friday Night Magic and play in a tournament, then you might not end up playing some of these more off the wall cards or weird builds or something.
Yep. That leads me to an interesting thing that I want to touch on later. I'm going to mention it now so that we touch on it later. I think that with the exception of Commander, every other format is often defined by what is their competitive play aspects. I think that that's important to bring back for another conversation another time. But since we are over to Commander, I think that you starting on Commander is probably a better way to start. So we are shifting entirely into what we call the casual scene. Again, using pretty heavy air quotes.
The casual scene. So like, I don't know how I feel about it. Like, I don't like Super Friends decks in Commander personally. And by that, I mean, of course, like trying to assemble as many Planeswalkers in a deck as possible. Because what you'll find is that like in any game it's in, a Planeswalker slows down the game just a hair, right? Like as we talked about, like adding life to either a player on opposed from you with a battle or yourself when you play a Planeswalker, like this just adds like a little bit more time to the game. And in most cases, that's not that big a deal. But when you're playing like an entire Super Friends deck, that can add an hour to the game just on your own side, because now you're taking your decision paths, because each one is a decision path, right? Like when you play a Magic card and it says, okay, when it enters the battlefield, do these things, and when it dies, do these things, and when it attacks, do these things. You only have like one-ish decision whenever one of these things happens. But when a Planeswalker comes out, it says, okay, it's out. Now do one of the three things. And you're like, which of these three things is the most important thing to do right now?
Mm-hmm.
Or four in some cases.
It's true. If you are playing three Planeswalkers that say all of them have enough loyalty to do any of their abilities, that means that you have created 9 possible paths to moves just from those 3 cards alone, which doesn't sound like a lot. It shoots up to 27 with a 4th one. It shoots up to 81 with a 5th one.
That doesn't count the which one do I play first, right? Say you got all 3 in hand and you got to sequence them. Mm-hmm. So that just took all those and then added another exponent to it.
Mm-hmm. So it can get really dicey really quick. As a player who has played Super Friends quite a bit in the past, I will say that I think that Super Friends is the worst way to play Commander. And I think it sounds really mean. If you're a fellow player out there who likes Super Friends, I'm really sorry for you, because I'm not talking about you as a player or anything like that, but just understand that, like, I used to play Super Friends a lot. Like, I've had advanced Super Friends, I've had 5-color, I did Jeskai in Standard at one point. I find Planeswalkers to be really fun, and like being able to trap my opponent into those catch-22s where it's like, I have to kill this Planeswalker or it'll kill me, but if I don't kill the player, they'll kill me. You know, that made me feel so good back when I was playing competitive. Once I switched my aspect over to playing Commander and playing Commander with people that I wanted to be able to play Commander with for a long time, playing Super Friends was not feasible anymore, because it does nothing for a very, very, very long time, and then it wins. Like, the chances of your opponent overcoming your Planeswalker deck once you get a start going is astronomically low, because of the hard lock it does to the entire field. I had a game when I first started joining this group where I tried to bring out that Advanced Super Friends deck to see if I could do any fixes to it. And it was me and one other person left. This person I knew was going to make a bunch of dragons the next turn and swing at me. I'm like, I guess I'll just ultimate a Johnny and gain 100 life. And I did that, and I won that game, because even though they were able to, I think they were playing like Sneak Attack Miriam. So like they were getting a lot of dragons out. Even with the sheer number force of dragon tokens and all that stuff that they made, 80 damage does not equal 100 damage.
Yeah.
And so what should have been a finishing blow for them ended up being a long, long walk off a pier. Yeah. And I felt bad about it. I couldn't stop thinking about how not fun this was for my opponents, and that made me have less fun, because I couldn't imagine having to sit there and watch me do this to them. So when it comes to Super Friends specifically, I say keep it out of Commander if you can, because they don't have enough of that stuff yet that turns like Planeswalkers into creatures to make it good. Like with the introduction of Luxior, and then there's the new one in the new World Enchantment in
Spark Rupture.
Spark Rupture.
Yeah.
They're starting to get things for it, but until they create more stuff like that, where you can start like really switching whether your planeswalkers are creatures or not creatures, it's too slow, and it'll always be too slow.
Yeah.
I'm curious though, how do you feel about planeswalkers in commander decks that are not focused around planeswalkers?
I don't mind a couple. I like, this is my personal opinion. I'll usually sprinkle a few in because I still like the card. It's not that I think that they're like a complete thorn in the side of commander, but I'm more I sprinkle it in. I'm a planeswalker dieter, much in the way that I was saying, like, how did I put that? I'm a dieter when it comes to a lot of this Magic stuff, right? Like, I allow myself my indulgences. So, like, I have probably one or two, maybe three in most of my decks, and like, they're flavorful. I try to stick to my theme as much as I can. I mean, I have one deck that has several in it. It's not a Super Friends deck by any stretch, but it's like Liliana flavored. So I have several of the Lilianas in there. It's probably the one with the most. I think I have like 8. So like, that's a good percentage of the deck, but it's still not the whole deck. And like, there's other ones where I think that they're like a good fit in, say, like a thing I'm trying to do. So I really like, for example, we saw in my Rith deck from a couple episodes ago. In that deck, I run Garruk Primal Hunter. And that's the one that, like, it +1 makes a token. -2, 3?
-3.
-3, because it comes out with 3. That's what it is. It's 2 green, green, green for a 3 loyalty planeswalker. +1, make a 3/3 beast. -2, draw cards equal to the greatest non-human creature power you control. And then I forget what the ultimate does, because make a worm for each land you control. I think that's -6.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, so here's my hot take on planeswalkers in Commander outside of planeswalker decks. I think you hit the number almost right on the head. I would say any less than 7 or 8 planeswalkers in a deck, you'd almost be better off not running them at all. And I say that only because with the way that Commander works in terms of its like consistency basis, there are other cards like Garruk Primal Hunter, for example. I will almost always use that -3 when it comes out to just draw, right? Which I believe kills it. I think that it's just enough to kill it right off of the bat. So essentially, I've just put a second copy of Greater Good in my hand, or not Greater Good, but
Return of the Wild Speaker.
Return of the Wild Speaker. Which it's nice to have that consistency of double Return of the Wild Speaker. But I don't think of Garruk in that moment as a planeswalker. I think of it as a copy of Return of the Wild Speaker in my hand, because that's the way I almost always use it, and it's very rare that the versatility ends up getting used. So at around 7 or 8, I feel like you have enough of them that you feel like you are truly playing planeswalkers in your deck, because you're getting that functionality of the versatility and the different things that it can do. Anything less than that, I feel like most of the time you're going to end up playing the ones that do something that a sorcery or instant could do and then go away, or you're not going to hit them often enough to do like the versatility of effect anyway, because a lot of the ones that just like +1 for a 3/3 beast or whatever are not that good, with the exception of the heavy hitters like Nissa, Voice of Zendikar, and or not Voice of Zendikar, you know what I'm talking about, 5-cost Nissa from War of the Spark.
Who Shakes the World.
Who Shakes the World, thank you. Nissa Who Shakes the World, or something like that impacts games no matter what format you're in. That's sort of my take on planeswalkers in Commander. It's like, I think that you should be running somewhere around 7-8% planeswalkers if you're going to run them. Otherwise, run the ones that are good, but know that a lot of times you might be able to just find a sorcery or an instant or a creature that can do it better.
Like, I'm not going to go out on any stretch and say that you're wrong, because one, I didn't do any math myself. What I will say is I don't care.
Oh, sure.
Like, I don't mean this rudely, right?
No,
like,
absolutely not.
I don't care, right? Like, you're sure. I imagine you're right. You've done some research. You looked at various deck lists, and ultimately, it doesn't matter to me. In Commander, I run all sorts of dumb junk anyway.
Yeah, and of course, I'm also speaking on the idea of like, it's Commander. You play what you want in Commander. Like, it's. I'm not saying that you can't play what you want, right? Like, I'm not telling you not to play your favorite cards, but I am saying that, like, on terms of just sort of like the mathematics ratio of a deck, that's where Planeswalkers tend to fall for me. It's either put them in enough that you see them, or don't, or find something else that hits the same consistency mark of what you're trying to do.
Like, and so your consistency mark is a valid point, and I will say that, like, for example, if you do go back 2 episodes and you look at the deck list that I've included in the show notes for that one, and you look at my Rith the Awakener deck, that is not in a Planeswalker category, that is in a draw category.
It is, right?
So when I'm saying, like, when I look at stuff, and you're not wrong in saying, like, if you want this to show up X amount of times, you need to have X amount of them in there. You are correct. I included roughly 10 draw spells. That happens to be one.
Yep.
Now, do you think that there's a better one for that slot? I don't know. Maybe not.
No,
I like that one because it's got some versatility. But like,
yeah, and
right?
I don't want
it doesn't matter that it's a Planeswalker.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's not that you don't play the card or whatever, but you're acknowledging that it is not because it's a Planeswalker. It's because it is a draw spell, and that's kind of that's what I'm trying to say. Is that when you hit that 7 or 8 mark, you're using Planeswalkers to be Planeswalkers most of the time. You're going to hit that level of that versatility and that choice problem for your opponents. If you're using them less than that, you're probably just using them because they are a copy of an effect that a sorcerer in an instant fills in for you.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, and in that regard, like, I still don't think, if you're chasing after do I have enough of these in my deck to be a Planeswalker type deck, then you're still edging towards Super Friends. And like, we have already voiced and agreed that maybe that's not a super grand idea. If you're going to run a bunch of them because you like them, super cool. Like my Liliana deck with 8 of them it's not because I can't wait to have you have problems.
Yeah.
It's because I like Liliana as a character, and I built a deck with the flavor of, like, a lot of the other cards are in there. My only demonic tutor I own was the one with her in the art. So in the deck it went. I went and specifically bought the Diabolic Tutor, the crappy 4-mana one that's an uncommon, but I went and found the one with Liliana whispering in Chandra's ear, and that went in there. I don't care how many Planeswalkers are in there. I just wanted a bunch of Liliana stuff. And so that's where, if you're asking me personally, I don't build Planeswalker decks. I have Planeswalkers in my deck.
Exactly. And I think that's the distinction I was looking for. On that note, I want to share a quick story with the crew. I believe Adam's heard this one before, but I'm also a big fan of Liliana. The Planeswalker is, I love her storyline. Her aesthetics have been awesome ever since she was made. She's very much my type of character. Very cool. I have a friend from St. Louis, or rather a person that I hung out with on the regular in St. Louis. And this person does not like the fact that I like Liliana. He is very much into fiction and gets very impassioned about fiction. And one of his things in fiction is he doesn't like villains. Like, it's not that he doesn't think villains should exist, but he doesn't think that people should connect with villains. He thinks it's unhealthy when, like, people like find villains, like find some sort of villain worship or villain energy.
No, like, as good, honest, God-fearing people, we should not identify with an evil character.
Right. That's the basic gist of what it was like. And so one time he and I were having a conversation at a restaurant, and I had like mentioned that Liliana was my favorite character in the story. And he was like, "Oh yeah, really?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, if I were stuck in the magic world, I'd probably just end up being one of Liliana's lackeys. Like, it would be one of those things that, like, I'm Liliana's steward or something, right? I'm the guy holding the candlestick, welcoming her home. So then, yes ma'am, no ma'am type thing. She can bully me all day long." And he was so upset that he started crying, like physical tears. And he was saying things like he was questioning our friendship over Liana being my favorite character in Magic.
That's some dedication to fiction right there.
It's powerful. It's powerful. And if for some reason you listen to this, bud, I don't have anything against you or your opinion. That's your opinion. You're allowed to have it. It was just a bit much. You know what I mean? Just a little bit.
Like, it's a testament to the character development when they have managed to create and this isn't all fiction, honestly. I mean, like, looking at this at like a not at a macro level, is that like when you can design a villain that can be identified with, that's the sign of good writing. Because and it's easy to look and see, like, I don't know, let's put, like, look back way back on like the 80s cartoons, like we were talking about. Megatron and Optimus Prime. Let's look at that. Hey, cool, we're bringing it around.
Yeah.
Megatron and Optimus Prime, the super duper good guy and the super evil bad guy. And it was what it was, and every episode ended the same way. You go forward these like 30 goddamn years, and you look at it as how they're writing the fiction now, and they're saying, like, they're showing fallibility to Optimus Prime and his decisions in the last several years of the comics. I don't read them a ton, but like you read through and you're like, oh my gosh, Optimus Prime is maybe a little bit zealous in his dedication to the cause. And then you start reading, like, they've developed more of the backstory of Megatron and saying that he was like an oppressed worker and the Autobots were just kind of like this autocratic kind of like fascist state. And you look back and now you're starting to see like these things and you're starting to be able to identify with Megatron more. And even so far as to say, like, the Thanos example of, like, he just wanted a universe that wasn't so overburdened. Maybe didn't go about it the right way, but like, so when you're able to identify with a villain and start seeing things that you can relate to, that's good writing. Maybe the villains in the story went about it in a terrible way with like a half genocide, literally half genocide. Maybe not a great plan.
Also, since he was trying to get, a glove that had infinite power and he could have just doubled resources, wouldn't have.
Well, I know, yeah.
I mean,
you're not wrong.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get into Thanos right now. I don't have time for that.
I'm just referring to how, like,
but being able to sympathize with a character is the first step in investing into a story. And so even if they sympathize with the villain, you can sympathize with the villain and still want them to lose too. Like, when a story is told really, really well, you can be like, I get where that person's coming from. I hate them and I can't wait for them to lose, but I understand where they're coming from. That's huge. That's human nature. That's really important to have. So now with that tangent sufficiently out of the way,
super tangenty,
we can get into the last one, Cube.
And huge shout out, because I think one of the major, we talked about at the top of the episode, but huge shout out to Light. They had asked very specifically, pointed at me in a DM, how do you feel about Planeswalkers and I'm going to look right into the dang camera. How do you feel about Planeswalkers and Cube? And I went, that's an excellent question. I avoid them, but I don't actually know. So, and I think that, like, I've managed to, like, bring my opinion around a little bit to, like, an actual opinion after having discussed them in, like, a few other things. And I'm going to do my very best not to fall on my throwaway answer of it depends on your cube. Because that's dumb.
And like, that's just naturally true. Just know that.
Yeah. Right.
Just know that.
Anything, any card you ever ask me, you're going to say, hey, Adam, I want to put this card in my cube. How do you think it'll do? And I'm going to be like, I don't know. Show me the other 500 cards. Like, I have no idea until I see it. But I think that if you were looking at this from just like the general holistic, should I put Planeswalkers in my cube? I think that my answer is going to be yes. I think that they do add a certain something to the game. We've all become used to them. They have iconic characters, and a lot of us have really come to idolize, I guess, is not a great one, but you know what I mean. Some of these characters and like generate our love for the game around watching these characters develop, and most of them are on Planeswalker cards. And what was one of our very first points when we were talking about putting cards in your cube?
Put the cards in that you want to put in.
Yeah, pick your favorites. Pick your favorites. And a lot of these cards are going to be your favorites. My recommendation about putting your Planeswalkers into your cube isn't should you or shouldn't you. It's a warning to make sure that you look at your cube on the whole and make sure that the environment you're constructing can support it. Mm-hmm. And this is like something that we talk about on a lot of different should I, shouldn't I's. But if you go back a couple episodes on the cube that we're building for our podcast here, and we were looking very specifically at removal, just make sure your removal can handle the stuff in your cube. If you're going to put in Planeswalkers, make sure you have enough creatures to attack these Planeswalkers. If you're going to put in Planeswalkers, make sure you put in a few of the spells that can destroy Planeswalkers specifically. Make sure that some of your red damage spells have the ability to target Planeswalkers. Make sure that you're staying balanced within your environment, and you should be fine. Because, and here's something, and this is I'm really happy that Light brought this up, and also we played Light's Cube, because here's the thing that I learned this weekend from playing Light's Cube. When I first looked at the list, and I'll be honest, I didn't say this to them directly. This is the first time I'm saying it to anybody. I was actually scared. I thought that the cube was way too powerful. I thought I was looking through some of the heat that was put into this list, and I was like, holy crap, I am scared. And then I started drafting it, and then we played, and we had a good game where even my bad deck still did some cool stuff. Everybody popped off, and we all had some interaction, and we all had some fun. And I realized that my fears were for naught, because Light took away the most important piece of advice we had, and that's make sure your cube is balanced. So, my opinion on Planeswalkers and cube, do whatever you want.
Sure.
Just follow our other advice.
Exactly. And, all of this is an extension of things that we had already talked about, right? Like, it's not wild to play your favorite cards. Planeswalkers are often people's favorite cards because they have memories attached to them and, stakes. Also, though, it feels like when we talk about that power and that balance thing, mainly, if I were talking, again, it's not a matter of should or shouldn't, and it is a question of keeping things balanced. The main thing that you can do is be aware of what a card is doing to your cube. And that's true of any card, but that happens a lot more with Planeswalkers than it does with other cards, so it should be said. Uh-huh. If you are playing in a cube environment and someone puts down, let's say, a Vivian and a Garruk. I don't know anybody who would do that during a game when he's playing a green-blue proliferate deck. But they get down to a Garruk and a Vivian. If it ends up affecting the board in such a way that the players are scrambling to kill said Vivian and said Garruk, or scrambling to kill that player so that they don't have to deal with them anymore, then you're noticing something that's a problem. In the case of Light's Cube this past weekend, it wasn't. Mm-hmm. I had 2 Planeswalkers out. I had something that gave my Planeswalkers loyalty, and I was on par with all the shenanigans that were already going on the board. They were less powerful Planeswalkers, but I believe that was by design, because Light knew that they wanted that piece of the format in, and you should put that piece of the format in. I think, actually, now that I say it, should is a good word for Planeswalkers, and the main reason for that is that it is a part of the game. It is a part of the game that we are familiar with, that we experience, that exists for a reason. They didn't just throw in Planeswalkers because they'd be like, oh, this is something that'll make us a ton of money. Sure, they knew that would happen, but it was to add dynamic to the game. And if you take that away, you are taking away the last 15 years of a dynamic that has been a staple of the way the game is played. So adding Planeswalkers to your cube is, and you have to work so much harder to balance if you're not adding them. But just be wary of what they're doing to the field around it.
Yep.
I think that's important.
So, Light, this one's for you. That's our opinion. Do it. Just make sure that your cube is functioning the way you would like it to function.
And by the way, your cube was great. It was fun.
Yeah. I don't know if I was clear about that. We definitely made sure that we did the thing about when Light hosted I just want to talk about how proud I am of all the different steps that were followed from our various things. We definitely had like a post-cube chat, even though most of you were very exhausted because it's 2 hours later for everyone we were playing with from me. And it was only like 10 o'clock for me. And everybody else is like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
But we still definitely had like the post-game decompress and like, how did it go? What did y'all think? Anything you guys... I was really impressed with, the way that the criticism was handled. I did have one small piece. But largely, I think all of us had a really good time with it, and I'm really impressed.
Absolutely. So,
shout out.
So, general feelings on walkers. I think we've more or less talked about how we feel about walkers. Let's finish up with the actual question. How do we feel about them being lessened / maybe even leaving play for a while?
So first and foremost is just like a general, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Prediction? They're not gone.
No.
I don't think they're going to cut them out completely.
No.
They can't.
No.
Especially considering, like, so one thing to keep in mind that was just announced, like, this week per recording, but by the time this comes out, it'll have already been announced for like a week and a half or something like that. Standard has changed now. Standard is now a 3-year gap instead of a 2-year. It happens every 3 years instead of every 2 years, or it includes 3 years. So there's no rotation this year, and then rotation will be the following year. So now Standard will include 3 years worth of cards instead of 2, just to create a little bit more stable environment. They assume it's going to fix it. We'll see. That said, so with having 3 years worth of cards in a format, cutting out all the planeswalkers isn't going to work. There's too many other cards that say destroy target planeswalker that still have to matter and stuff like that. The card has been around for like 15 years. They're not just going to like guillotine it and away rolls the head of planeswalkers. Like they're not going away. I think that they're just doing it in like, and this comes back to, I speak on it regularly. This is the pendulum effect again. They went so hog wild with things like War of the Spark, and then all will be one, March of the Machines, everything's about the planeswalkers again, and all this, like, everything's about them, the Infinity Saga, all this stuff. So they just have to swing it back, because they realize that, like, after all this time, this has basically been the whole shebang of Magic is just like, what are the planeswalkers up to now? And we lose sight of a lot of the super cool legendary creatures that we don't get to see very much of because they only show up for one set and then they're gone. And we don't get to explore the rest of the Magic world because we're too busy following Carmen Sandiego. Right? So they got to swing it back. But I'm happy about this. And here's where my opinion comes in. I'm happy they're diminishing for now. Not because I don't like them, but because I think they've dominated too much of the space. And too much has been about them, that now finally that they're out of the way, they just released the first new card type since Planeswalkers. The whole game has been about that card type for 15 years. And then they just released a new one. What good is it going to be for them to have released a new card type if all they're going to do is just put it on the coattails of Planeswalkers? They got to let them go out of the way for a bit. And then they got to let us experience that and whatever else they got coming up, because we've had just a lot of it. I'm happy about it. I don't know that I'm particularly one way or the other about what it's done lore wise, because now we've had, like, with March of the Machine Aftermath being spoiled in its completion all at once, twice. All of these desparked planeswalkers are now receiving legendary creatures cards, which I think is cool-ish. I don't personally mind one way or the other. It's not for me. But I am excited for, say, like Nahiri fans who have been unable to build a red-white Nahiri deck, even though Nahiri had like a mono-white equipment deck however many years ago with the
Right.
Planeswalker front like face card deck, right? So like Nahiri fans can now have a Nahiri deck with Nahiri at the front of it. The black green elf players that liked Tyvar Kell can now have a black green Planeswalker, or sorry, elf deck with Tyvar up front and really show like what a Tyvar deck can do, and still have the Tyvar cards in there. But I mean, the other thing is that like this is just like playing to the players who like those characters. I don't think it really matters because we already have cards in those archetypes, in those colors, doing those things. It didn't really break any new ground.
Yeah, I mean, I have an extra thought on that, but mostly I'm kind of in the same position. I do think that uh, planeswalkers aren't going away. Obviously, you can't just eliminate a card type that has done a complete 180 on the format. You know, they didn't make tribal sorceries and things anymore after Lorwyn, and that was fine because it was that one set. It happened there. The fact that they still exist can be problematic at times when things are looking at macro card types, but often it doesn't even matter. It's not going to function because there's just not that many of them. At this point, there's far too many planeswalkers that exist within the game for them to just stop making planeswalkers. So they're going to keep making planeswalkers. And I do think that lessening them is a direction both tied to Commander and wanting to be able to put legendary creatures that people will recognize and enjoy having as legendary creatures in their deck, as well as continuing to de-emphasize whatever it is that they thought planeswalkers were emphasizing lore-wise and mechanics-wise, and give us a little bit something new to work with, like battles and things like that. One of the things I wanted to add on that idea, though, is that I think that this change of standard is actually super helpful towards that problem that people thought of when they thought planeswalkers were diminishing. Because if you think about planeswalkers going away from the format, players who like planeswalkers will be like, oh, well, now I won't ever get to build like Super Friends decks in Standard or whatever, because we'll never hit ahead of them, or I'll never have that many in a particular color so that I can solidify an identity with that thing going on. With Standard being 3 years, that's not true, because they'll still be, there might be the same number of planeswalkers that we now see every 2 years extended to every 3 years, and still putting you in a position where when you're in Standard, you're getting to play multiple commanders. But when you're in Sealed and you're in Draft, you won't see 16 planeswalkers running around, which would be very nice for pretty much every limited format.
Yeah, basically. Make them bombs again instead of like just such a prolific thing.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Magic. My favorite time with Planeswalkers and Magic, even being a Super Friends player, was like when there were 3 a year or 5 a year. Because often it meant that if one ended up being a super heavy bomb and really, really good, they could just ban it and it was not a big deal. But also it gave me just enough spice into what I wanted to do and the things that I like to play with, that I could do it, but I could also ignore it, and it wasn't that big of a deal. I like having that choice. And I think older players and newer players alike like having options.
Yeah. My first modern deck only had one planeswalker in it. It was like kind of like a Selesnya Elves thing, and I had a original Nissa Ravane when she was like an elf type planeswalker instead of like a land type planeswalker.
Yeah, when she cared about elves, yeah.
Yeah. And like at the time that was really cool, and it was nice to be able to play with one and like not care if I didn't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that like, because there was so format warping at so many times that like if you didn't get your planeswalker and the other person did, then it just like it was a non-game. Mm-hmm. And I think that I'm looking forward to like fewer. I shouldn't say that. They can do whatever they can release other cards that make things non-games, but I just think that like if I'm gonna lose, I don't want to lose staring down like 6 planeswalkers and then not be able to do anything and just watch the solitaire on the other side.
Yeah, and
as I continue to not win.
Which we say the same thing about like prison decks, right? And other kind of lock stacks kind of things, where it's like it's not about whether or not you win or lose. Did you get to play the game? And so hopefully this will be sort of a hint of some players to let your opponents play the game. I'm not saying never play control, but understand that everybody's there to do the same thing.
Well, and that's another topic. That's a topic for another day. You just opened a can of worms. But gang, we're actually rounding out on our time here. So hit us up down in the comments. I am interested to know if you think we're super wrong or if you're super right. How do you feel about planeswalkers leaving? Or diminishing, I guess is the case may be. Do you play planeswalkers in your commander decks? Do you play them in your cubes? Tell us all about it. And I think that's going to bring us to a close. So Matt, thank you very much for having this conversation with me. I appreciate you.
Always.
And friends, we will see you next time on Unlimited Commander. Have a great time.
Bye.
If you liked what we had to say, consider supporting us on Patreon. Your support goes directly to growing and improving the show.
You can also like, follow, and subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Make sure to comment or leave a review. The cast can also be found on Twitter at Unlimited Commander.
You can find Matt's Twitch, Twitter, and other YouTube projects at knowledgepoolmtg.com.
And Adam can be found on Twitch and Twitter at Adamus_Prime86.
Our theme song is Polaroid by Harris Heller, licensed by Creative Commons.